All right. Well, come on in, everybody. Grab a virtual seat. Welcome to the next presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Arehart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 288th, being recorded on Thursday, April 29th. Oops, got the wrong screen up there. Thursday, April 29th at 11. Sorry, that's 12. That's my mistake. Sorry, I'm just discombobulated. I'll explain in a moment. 12 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Our presenter today is going to be me, yours truly, Charlie Arehart, and I'll be speaking on installing ColdFusion 2021, choices, challenges, and solutions. And when I say I'm a little discombobulated, it's because it's really weird when I'm the presenter and the organizer, because there's just a pattern I get into that the pattern's thrown off and the screen sharing is different. So I apologize in advance for some flubs there like that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. And in fact, some of you may have wondered when you saw that was number 287. Sorry, not 288. You might have said, well, wait, what happened to 287? Last week's was 286. And what it was is that I was doing some research into the past meetings in anticipation of our coming 300th episode. And I found that back in 2013, 2014, between those 2 years, I had two sessions that had the same number. So rather than go back and renumber all the ones in the past, I'm just going to start from now forward, lifting it up by one number. So this is number 288. Doesn't matter to most of you, but some people are very observant. And so I wanted to be clear about that. I also want to share that all our sessions are recorded, like this one is being right now, and you can find them at recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. And also, this YouTube screen you're looking at, right, you who are watching it right now, that is, of course, where the recordings are, and you can subscribe to this channel and you can follow the playlist that's there. And this is indicated as being within a playlist of other recordings. And we have recordings here on YouTube going back to 2015. And then we have other recordings going back to the original ones in about 2006, some of which are still interesting to watch. So anyway, let's move on. I always want to point out that we welcome people considering coming on to present. If you have any questions about what that would entail, when it would happen, what we would use, what kind of topics, how long it would take, all those things are covered at this fact that I've put together that you can find at speak.coldfusionmeetup.com. All right. So with that, let me turn it over to yours truly. And welcome to those coming to see this talk. And by the way, I haven't seen anybody comment, so I'd love to hear from somebody there that there's no question about the audio. Usually I have somebody else to talk to, and so yeah, let me just hear from anybody at all saying we hear you. I'm a little worried that nobody is. Again, it's just so unusual when it's just me. And I don't have the YouTube channel open, so I'm not seeing there. Well, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and move on. And people who are watching, if there's no one here for some reason, there you go. Thank you. I was a little worried. I was going to say, at least people can watch the recording later, because I don't pay attention to how many people are on or anything like that, because I'm just usually focused on getting the thing going. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your chiming in. Appreciate it. Good to see those of you that chimed in. I'm sure there's others, because usually that's the case. Usually there's a lot of people that are quietly lurking, and that's no problem. All right. So let's proceed. So just quickly background, because I don't usually introduce myself on these presentations when I'm just hosting the session, but as a presenter, I want to point out that I'm an independent consultant, don't work for anybody but myself. I just focus on troubleshooting, primarily CF, and you can reach me via my email address, charlie@carehart.org, or via pretty much all social media at Carehart. Simple as that. It's great having a unique name. You can pretty much get your own thing that you can work with everywhere. All right. Oh, and I didn't think to point this out, but this presentation's, the slides are already up on my site at carehart.org. So if anybody wants to, for some reason, follow along and have those slides, you can. But more importantly, if you see me say something, and like I'm going to have links, lots of links as we go along, those links, you don't have to write them down. You can just go to the site, carehart.org, same thing as my domain name, and just go to the presentations area. And then you'll find all the couple hundred presentations that I've given over the past 20 years. All right, so I don't know what that little weird thing at the bottom is, but don't worry about that. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're talking about installing ColdFusion. You might think, well, let's just jump right in, but hold on, we got to slow down, Sparky, because some people have trouble just finding and downloading CF Installer. So we're going to talk about that for a minute. Then I'm going to talk about both the full, or what sometimes is called a GUI installer. It's not really proper to call it a GUI installer, because if you're running on Linux or at the command line and Windows or Mac or Solaris, it's not a GUI. But anyway, it's a full installer. And we're going to do that one first and focus on the choices that come up during that installer, because that's a lot of what I find throws people off. I help people do this almost every day, installing some version of CF somewhere. So I help people with this all the time, and I just wanted to gather it in a presentation. And then some of you may know that CF 2021 only, not earlier, but 2021 has a new, what they call zip install option. And it's got a separate CF install script. And it's got this notion of packages. And if you want to leverage that feature, you can. But I want to make this clear. Unfortunately, a lot of things give the impression that that's the way to install CF. And no, that's not the way. It's a way. And for most people, it'd be better to do the full installer like they're used to. But we'll talk about why this new option's there. We'll talk about what the benefits are. We'll talk about some of the challenges with it. So again, I'm trying to stress, don't go to that as your first go-to if you don't have a particular reason. And we'll talk about what those reasons are. Maybe it is for you, but maybe it's not. So anyway, moving on. This is also important. If you're licensing ColdFusion 2021, not if you're using the free developer edition or the trial edition, but if you put in a license key, now new in 2021 is that you must activate that license. Yeah, whoa, that's never happened before prior to CF 2021. And that will throw off a lot of people who've been stealing ColdFusion. But anyway, moving on, we'll talk briefly about that when we get to that. And there's a lot more I could cover, and some I will, and I'll definitely point you to resources for learning more. As far as what we won't cover, I just want to be clear up front, because we don't have an hour. We're not going to be able to cover everything. I'm not going to talk about what's new in 2021. Not going to talk about why would you consider moving to it. Not going to talk about what are the compatibility issues, if any, of moving your code. But let me just say quickly, since I'm not going to cover it any further, this is what I always tell people every day. I talk to people about moving from some version of CF to some version of CF. No one can tell you if your code's going to be compatible. No tool can be trusted to tell you if your code's going to be compatible. The bottom line is there's a range. I have had people literally just last week who made a jump from, say, CF11 to 2021, and they had no problem at all. Their code just ran. It absolutely can happen. Don't believe people who say it can't. It can. And I've also had people who made a jump from one version to another version, and everything seemed to fail. From the first page, nothing seemed to work. And they wanted to give up and move to Node. Let me just tell you, often, whatever the problem is, it's usually one or two things. And maybe those one or two things are just at the application CFC or CFM level, right? And you fix that problem and the problem goes away. Or maybe there's something that's used a lot in your app, but you find all the places where it's used and you fix it and the problem goes away. So it isn't, in my experience, making a move from any version of CF to another version of CF, even a leap of multiple versions, I've never seen it be something that was so onerous and impossible that it was going to take months of effort and people said, we're not going to do it. I've seen people give up without really trying very hard and use it as their reason to get off of it. But I'm just saying, it's not usually at all a big deal. And I'm serious that for some people, it's barely a deal. And for some people, it is absolutely no big deal, no deal at all to move to a new version. So anyway, that's all I want to say about that. We don't have time to get into it any further. I'm not also going to talk about migrating admin settings. That's its own topic. I covered that some in another presentation, and I'll point you at the end to other presentations I've done where I cover some of these topics in more detail, and you can attend to them later. And I'm also going to do some more on some of these topics that I'm skipping. And there's still more that we could talk about that, again, we won't have time to cover. There's a lot of things that people might ask or fear or wonder or trip over. And, you can ask questions as we go along. And if I can answer it quickly, we will. If I can't, I'll consider a future talk on it. So just quickly about myself. Again, I focus on server troubleshooting, independent consultant, and I assist organizations of all sizes and of all experience levels. And I work remotely 99% now, 100% of the time now, but usually it is still 99% of the time. And it's safe and secure and it's easy. We do a shared desktop session. I solve most problems in less than an hour, and I teach you as we go. So my goal is to get in, help you, and get out. I'm like a fireman. I come in, put out the fire, teach you to, don't forget to put batteries in your smoke detector. And that's it. And most importantly, I guarantee your satisfaction. If we spend time together and you don't find that time valuable, you will not pay for that time. It's as simple as that. And you can find more about my rates and approach at carehart.org/consulting. But to be clear, I'm not selling anything here. I'm just giving away the knowledge that I do, on the forums and in community and in my consulting sessions. All right, so let's move on. So this is also really useful because some people go, man, it's so hard to find ColdFusion on the Adobe website. You can't find ColdFusion on the Adobe website. I can't believe you can't find ColdFusion on the Adobe website. Adobe's a big company. Adobe's got hundreds of products. CF is just a fish in a pond. I don't want to say it's a small fish, but it's not as big as the, stuff that's designer oriented. So bottom line is, yeah, CF's not on the front page of the Adobe website. Let's move on. What we can do about that. And then rather than dig around trying to find it and Google it, blah, 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 just go to ColdFusion.com. This domain name has existed for years, and that will take you right to the Adobe ColdFusion product page. And on that, in fact, let's just go get there real quick. I think it'd be helpful to see it. Just a second. I wasn't planning to show that, but let's go ahead and do it. And don't give me any grief about all the tabs I have open. So everybody always wants to say something about that. Let's all live our lives. All right, so if you go to ColdFusion.com, ColdFusion.com, see it takes you to products, ColdFusion family, HTML. Now, even here, some people go, well, where is it? There's no download button. Where is it? I don't want to buy it. Well, there's a link to free trial right there. So if nothing else, just click the button for the free trial. And if you keep scrolling down, you'll also see information about the editions and about Builder and then about the developer edition. And for those who don't know, when you get ColdFusion, there is only one installer. We're going to talk about two kinds of installers, and we're going to talk about how they're different for each OS. But when it comes, we'll talk about Docker in a moment. When you want to just install, let's say, ColdFusion on Windows or ColdFusion on Mac, what I'm saying is that other than this new choice about zip or full installer, if we're getting the full installer or if we're getting the zip, there's one installer, whether you're doing a licensed paid version, whether you're doing the trial version, or whether you're doing the free developer edition. There's just one installer. When you run the installer of either of those two types, the full or the zip, it'll ask you which kind do you want to do. Do you want to do the free trial for 60 days? Do you want to have a license key? You want to put that license key in? Or do you want to let it be the developer edition? And if you choose the trial and then never put in a license key, it'll revert to the developer edition. And I'm going to show this in a moment, but I just wanted to clarify this here to say, it doesn't matter what button you click. You can click the free trial button. You can click the try now button on the developer edition. You're going to get the same place to see the installer. And I'll get there in just a second. Quickly about the Docker. I'm going to mention that briefly since Nicholas mentioned that. This talk is not going to talk about the Docker images. ColdFusion has had Docker images since CF 2016. And I will talk about that briefly at the end, mentioning that if you don't want to install CF, there are alternatives, and Docker is one of them. But let's move on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one. It'd be the same thing if I clicked on the free trial. Obviously, if I click buy now, I'd have to go pay for it. So when you click either the free trial or the developer edition, you're shown this form. And if you're not logged in, you can see my picture up here. I'm already logged into the Adobe site. You'd first have to log in. And then once you log in, you're shown this form. And if you filled this form out before, most of the fields are filled out. I'm not going to scroll down because I don't want you guys to see my details. But the point is, most of these fields are already filled in for you. And for some reason, every time you go here, you got to change the organization size and you got to choose the whether you plan to buy CF and when. But anyway, and then at the end, there's a choice about installers. And let me just, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and slide on down. There you go. So here we are at the bottom. Once you're at the bottom of this page, if you've not noticed it, there's a drop down there, and there's the Windows English full installer, 1.1 gig, zip installer, 147. And they don't clarify that very well there. I agree. But if you're on Windows, those are your two choices. If you're on Linux, there's your two choices. If you're on Mac, there's your two choices. Solaris. Then you start getting into Japanese versions of Solaris, Japanese versions of Windows and Mac. All right. So anyway, there are these two choices for all of them. And then you would click download. Now, listen, I don't have time right now to get into this, but some people find that when they click the download button, it doesn't download. And that's really frustrating. Well, first of all, I want to point out that if you are just sitting on this page, notice here, they have also links here. And I think actually this is brand new because this has long been a problem. Yeah, this is cool. That this is really brand new. Because if you look, I don't know if you guys can see it, but at the bottom, the link is going to the Windows full installer, and this is the Linux full installer. Now, let me tell you, somebody might get excited and think, oh, cool, I don't need to go through this page. You'll probably have to be logged in. I suspect they're still making you log in. And if I'd noticed this, I would have tested it out. But let's move on. I don't have time to deal with this. But you guys might want to check that out. That would be cool if you don't have to go to this login page anymore, right? That'd be awesome. But anyway, I suspect you'll still have to log in. But anyway, then there's also links to the PMT, the Performance Monitoring Toolset, the API Manager. And I just wanted you to see those are usually there, but this wasn't ever here. And some people would trip over this thing not working. And I hope that on the next page they repeat this, because sometimes it's when you go to the download, click the button, it's on the next page that it just nothing ever happens. And it'd be great if they offer those links there. But anyway, got to move on. We have too many things to cover. Can't get into all those details. All right, so there's my points I was making. All that and all that. Yep. And let me say as well that, and this is important because a lot of people don't know this, if you've bought ColdFusion or if your company has bought ColdFusion, you don't need to go through the front door. You got your own back door. And the back door, okay, it's on the next page. Okay, right. But anyway, it's, Steve, if you can try, anybody, if you can take your time, try it. I'd love to know if those links work if you're not logged in. You'll have to log out, obviously, or create a new incognito window or private window, but I got to move on. So anyway, I was trying to say that if you have bought CF, you got a back door. You don't need to go through the front door. You got a special entrance, and your special entrance is licensing.adobe.com. And if you log into that with whatever your account is for having bought CF, then there's a download there. And sometimes it's not the latest version of whatever download there is, so be careful about that. That's another subject we can't get into now. But the point is, you don't go through the front door and have to go through that form and be logged into that website. You just log into the licensing.adobe.com, and whatever you bought, you can still see installers for CF 10 and 9, and I think even 8. I've seen those when I've been helping people. They've had quite old CF installers still listed there because they bought them. And the point is, you would use the same steps about installing it, and that we're going to see, and it's the same installer again, whether it's licensed or free. It's really the same installer. And I do want to point out, because until that little piece was there today, if you couldn't get it from the Adobe site, you'd be like, come on, guys, I want to download ColdFusion. Why are you making this so difficult? And there's just usually it's a cookie problem, and there's ways to solve it, but we don't have time to get into that. But some folks are aware of, and I'll just point out that there is a community site called CFML Repo. And it's not about CFML, it's about CFML engines. And it's got ColdFusion and Lucy and Rilo and I think Blue Dragon. Anyway, so if you go, don't get too caught up in looking at that right now, but grab that URL, go look at it. And if you've never been there before, it's Gavin Pickin originally created it, and others have contributed to it, including myself. And so it's not just open for any knucklehead to upload stuff. You can trust that the people that are putting stuff there, like installers, are, trusted community people, and their stuff will have scanned it, and then it's on Google Drive, and Google, I believe, scans it when you upload it. Now, when you try to download it, they're so big, they say they can't scan it before they download it. But again, it's your call if you want to trust the community folks that are behind that. And I'm just saying that until that thing was there, when people were desperate, it was good to know that you could go to this alternative CFML repo, which has stuff going all the way back to, I think, CF 1.5. So yeah, if you want to run CF 3 or 4 and be reminded of what it was like before the turn of the century, that's how some of us lived. All right. So then I'll talk about this and some other alternatives to installing CF later, because I knew that could come up for some people. All right. So let's just talk about this traditional full installer or GUI installer. Again, it's the one that for years, that's what people used. And there's one for Windows and Linux and Mac and Solaris, one each. And the key is that there's several choices to consider, and those choices don't change between the OSs. And the focus of this talk is partly, for the most part, I want to talk about those choices. And then partly, for the most part, I'm going to talk about the new zip installer. I'm assuming that people coming here, there you go. Yep, good deal. I'm assuming here that people are here for this talk because they either don't install CF all the time and are often confused about those choices and questions, or they do install it and they're still confused about those questions, or maybe they were interested in looking into the new zip installer. Again, I'll get to the zip installer next, but I want to also do in this first 10 or 20 minutes talking about the installer itself and the questions that you get asked, because you get asked those questions even if you use the zip. And you might go, wait a minute, Charlie, we were talking about the zip. I thought you just unzip it and run it. No, the zip is not you just unzip it and run it. It's not. We'll get to that in a moment. there's a thing which you have to run, and it goes through some of these same questions because they need to set things up. And yes, it can be silently scripted. All of this stuff we're talking about can be silently scripted. So let's not get to that right now. We don't have time to cover every subject, but I mentioned it later in passing. All right. So I also want to point out that what I'm about to show you, there are screenshots of it in the docs. So this link, which again is too long for you to type, but get the presentation in the arehart.org/presentations. And that page of the docs does walk through the installer and the questions, but it doesn't give you some of the insight that I'm going to give you. So I'm not going to just leave it at, hey, read the docs, because unfortunately it's just not good enough. All right, so let's go do a demo. And I'm going to do it on Windows. And because I just do this stuff with people every day, and by far most people that are using CF are using Windows. Sorry, Linux people, I know you think everybody's moving to Linux or everybody thinks they're moving to Mac. Here's the deal. You guys that are using Linux and Mac, you know that you're used to seeing things that have been presented in Windows, and then you figure out how to do it in Linux and Mac. I'm going to try to show you the Linux one. I'm going to see how the time goes. I don't have a Mac, so I can't demonstrate the Mac. But again, the point is much of it is the same, so it doesn't matter. So here I am on a machine that currently has nothing on it. It's no ColdFusion, no nothing. And I just go ahead. I went ahead and put the installer for CF 2021 Windows. And before we go any further, I just want to share another tip that I help people with every day, because I see people's screens every day in the work that I do. I hate when I see this, because when you're seeing a big list of things and you can't see what the extension is, I've seen people open the wrong thing. It was a back and it wasn't the exe, or it was a log or whatever. Yes, I know this is there, but look, it's just much easier. Look up here, go to view, please, everybody, go to view and click file name extensions. And once you do that, now you see the file extensions. And if you missed it, I'm going to do it one more time. Go to view and choose file name extensions. And that doesn't just affect this folder, it affects everything in Windows Explorer, every folder you ever look at. So very important to do that. Not what we're talking about, but anyway, let's go ahead and move on. I'm just going to double click it and run it. That's really all we got to do. Now, the thing about this, and I want to say this while we're waiting, because this is going to take a little bit of time, maybe 30, 40 seconds. A couple things you should know. One is this is extracting what's in that exe. So that exe is an install anywhere installer. Adobe licenses it. And sometimes when things don't work in new versions of Windows, everybody screams that Adobe's so backwards. They don't keep things up to date. Why doesn't Windows 10 run on Server 2019? It's not that ColdFusion specifically doesn't run on some new thing. Same with also Mac versions and sometimes Linux versions. It's not that CF is the problem. It's this install anywhere software. If it's not designed to run on the new OS, then that will be where it'll either not run at all, or it'll get to the end and it'll seem to fail. And I'm just telling you from experience, it's usually the install anywhere software. Now, the second thing I want to say while we're waiting for this, it's not a waste of time, is this is taking a long time. It's kind of annoying, because what it's doing is it's extracting this exe. It's basically a zip, and it's got intelligence to extract things to certain places and run things certain ways. It's going to run Java. It's got Java embedded in it. So you have to wait for this thing to do its business, and it depends on your machine. This is a VM, so it's perhaps a little bit less, powerful than a normal machine would be. I'd run this before. I didn't see it take this long, so I don't know what's going on. But anyway, the bigger point is that is going to take its time, and it could be that one of the reasons why it's slowed is that if you have an antivirus on your machine, especially Windows folks, let me say this, you've probably got Windows Defender by default, or maybe you've added something of your own. And Larry, no, it was not necessary to run that as administrator. When we run Linux, it'll be necessary to run it as root. Let me just look at some of these other comments while we're here. Once upon a time, there was an awesome IDEA Studio. Yep. You can look at Studio. You have a hard time installing it on some later versions of Windows, but yep, it's there. And yeah, RDS. Yeah. Well, Builder supports RDS. People don't understand that and don't want to use Builder, but Builder supports RDS. But let me finish this thought. If you've got an antivirus tool like Defender, then the whole time this stuff's being extracted, it's being scanned. Every little file that's being created is being scanned. So that's going to be a potential thing that holds you up. And some people have more than one antivirus tool, and both tools are scanning everything that gets written or changed. But that's, for another day. So here we go. This thing's finally done. Now it's not done because look, this is what's going to happen. And this is so important you understand. The very first time you install pretty much any modern version of CF on Windows, it's going to say, I don't see that you've got the Visual C++ redistributable. And so this is something that there's a feature within CF that needs that. Not everything does, but the point is it needs it. CF's going to presume you need to install it. You need to install it. You can't skip it. So here's the deal. I'm going to have to click OK, and it's going to install it. And it just automatically finds it and runs it. I didn't have to go get it. I didn't have to download it. I have to run it. It's doing it. And what's funny is you watch this, and it's going to run. And when it's done, it's going to come back and say, OK, cool, I'm done. And now look what it says. You need to restart the installer to continue with the installation. And that's kind of sucky because bam, there goes the installer and we got to start over. So I'm going to go ahead and start over. And in fact, I'll tell you what, let me see if I can turn off Defender in this. Again, I'm in a Windows VM. It's called a sandbox. I'm not going to get into that right now. It doesn't let me have all the capabilities that I would normally have yet. It doesn't look like I can control that. Normally there's a feature in here where I can turn off what's called real-time scanning, but I can't do that in this sandbox. So anyway, moving on, I'm just going to run that thing again. Should have done that before I talked. But I wanted to show that if I had turned off that antivirus scanning called real-time protection, it would have gone faster. And here's my point. This is doing it all over again. It doesn't care that it already extracted it. And that's stupid. And I wish they would improve that, but they haven't forever. So don't think we'll ever see that get fixed. So we just got to wait. And again, on most people's machines, this would only take about, 30 seconds to do. In mine, it's taken about 90 seconds. So we'll just let it run its course. While we're waiting, any other yet? We always, yeah. So Daniel says we have to turn off McAfee. Right. McAfee, Sophos, Cisco, you name it. I've seen them all. They are usually, you'll find on Windows machines that down in the bottom right corner, it's either here, or if you click the little up arrow here, you will see it. And sometimes with some tools, you'll be able to like right click on it and say, could you turn yourself off, please? Or you could say, could you turn yourself off for 15 minutes? Or you could open it and go into the interface and say, could you turn yourself off, please? Or could you turn off this real-time scanning? Or could you turn yourself off for a few minutes, please? So everyone's different. I don't have time to get into that, but yeah, it can make a big difference. And someone says, for a developer, do you recommend installing on a VM? Nicholas, no, I don't recommend installing on a VM. Let me tell you why. Not that you shouldn't. I'm just saying I don't recommend it. I'm saying you don't need to, because CF is just a program and it's a service. And if you don't have CF currently on the machine, then there's nothing to fear about installing it. It's not going to corrupt your machine. It's not going to break your machine. Now, if you were to say, well, I've got CF9 on my machine and I want to run CF 2021. Well, just to be clear, you can run new versions alongside old ones. I was going to mention that later. You can absolutely run a new version alongside an old one. But if you wanted to use a VM, yes, you could. And then Damien points out that he uses command box. And let me just say, I was going to get to that towards the end when I say alternatives to installation. Yes, command box is an alternative to installing ColdFusion. Now you might go, well, then why are we here? Let's just use command box. The reason we're here is that not everybody uses command box, and people sometimes can't. So just really quickly, while we're waiting for that to come up, you can't use command box and put in a ColdFusion standard license, right? So if you're using ColdFusion standard and you want to see it act as if it's licensed for standard, you can't do that with command box. And then as command box is very powerful for doing a lot of cool things with lots of different versions, and it's got a lot of great power. I'm not knocking command box, but I'm saying, and this is very important, a lot of people are in situations where that is not the solution for them for whatever reason, whether by choice, whether by not being aware. The point is, not everybody can use command box to be the answer to every question that comes up. And it's frustrating to me because I try to show how to solve problems for people that need to do things. And I'm often told, well, I'm just telling you to use command box. I'm not against command box. I'm just saying not everybody's going to be using command box. Okay, so let me move on. You can upload the VM to the cloud. Well, Nicholas, I don't know what you mean by you can upload the VM to the cloud, but if that's a benefit for you, okay. You can also, run ColdFusion on a VM in the cloud. You can run ColdFusion on an EC2 instance or a Google Cloud Platform VM. Or in fact, I probably should have added that to the list. There's a lot of other alternatives in the cloud that we're not even going to get into. And Francisco's yelling, command box is a must. It's not optional. Well, again, let's just agree to disagree. There are some, for development, you can argue that it is great, and you can say that all developers should know how to use it. But let me be clear, not everybody that's sitting here right now is a developer, and they're not interested in implementing command box on their local machine. They're installing ColdFusion for use in a production server. And again, some circumstances you cannot use it. And for a lot of circumstances, one may not want to use it. So let's not make this a debate about command box. Again, I'm saying up front, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's not the answer to everybody's problems. Okay, let's get on. So does CF, yeah, so Steve, this is kind of off the subject, but you're saying, does CF Enterprise still include 3 CF Builder licenses? Yes, and ColdFusion standard purchase includes 1 CF Builder license. And if anybody hears that and goes, what? Just Google ColdFusion CF Builder license. And I've even got a blog post where I talked about that, but you should find other resources that cover it. But let's please move on. We got to get back to this because there's a lot of stuff to cover. You cannot use command box installed server in production with, yeah, I already said that. Yeah, Carl, if you missed it, I said that in passing, but thank you for adding it. All right, let's move on, please, everybody. Let's hold off on any further discussion of that for now. Let's wait till we have a chance because I got to focus on what we came here to talk about. We're already a half hour in. So here's the installer. And let me just say, please don't anybody use that as a cudgel. And so, well, that's the whole problem. It takes a half hour to install it. No, it doesn't. I usually install ColdFusion in less than 5 minutes. We're talking about things, and I'm also on a VM that's a little bit slow. But the point is, again, let's not debate whether people should do it or not. People do need to do it. And this is talking to the people that do need to or do choose to. And again, I wasn't going to ignore alternatives. I will get to them later. All right, moving on. Here's the installer. And this is pretty much straightforward. You just follow the screens and read what it says. And you're giving away your left arm. No, you're not really. It's no problem. So here's the big point is if you put in a license key, then yes, it will be a licensed version. And you will later have to do activation. Or it will do it for you under the covers. If you don't have a license key or don't want to run it as a licensed version, you can just say, I want to do a 30-day trial, or I want to do the developer edition. And I have blog posts talking about the differences and things like that. Again, that's not the focus of this talk right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on and say I'll do the developer edition. And if you've never known that was there, yeah, absolutely. I've talked to a lot of people who say, I didn't know you could install ColdFusion for free. Yes, you can install ColdFusion for free. The developer edition is free. And it's limited to a couple of IP addresses in it, and you're not allowed to use it for production. And you read the license agreement, it explains all that stuff. All right, then there's this choice here. And if you're going to be deploying ColdFusion onto, WebSphere, WebLogic, Jetty, Glassfish, Tomcat of your own choosing, Tomcat, you could deploy ColdFusion as a war or an ear. I am not going to get into that in this talk. It's very, very rarely used by most people. Most people just want to do this thing called the server configuration. And yes, under the covers, it implements Tomcat, but you don't know that unless you know that. It's never going to be exposed in any way that you'd know. So let's not talk about that. That's not important. The point is, most people, if they just do this, they will get an installation of ColdFusion. On Windows, it'll be set up as a service. On Linux, you'll get the option to enable it as a service. Let's move on. And here's where I really want to focus this presentation on is a lot of these choices. Like this is new in 2021. Are you planning to do this for production, development, staging, testing, or disaster recovery? And you can go to this website here and you can literally highlight it with your mouse and you could go visit that page. I'll leave you to look into that on your own, but just pick whichever one you're going to do. And what it is that it'll enable primarily between production, development, and anything else. It'll enable different levels of some settings that are better suited to production. And again, this talks about it. And development will open up some settings that are better suited to development. So you should read that. I wish they would give you more here, but they don't, but they leave you to read that. I just want to point out, you should read that. And the link is there. And then this has been around for a while. Sorry, I didn't notice what I picked. I wanted to pick development. This next screen has been around since about 2016, if not CF11. And you get this further choice of, are you doing development profile, production profile, or production plus secure? Well, again, I don't have time to get into this in great detail. It's seemingly redundant to the last screen, but the point is this one does give you a little more information. And it does talk about what sort of things are enabled with the different things. And then again, most importantly for some people, it has a link to what is the secure profile. So I'm just going to say this quickly. The secure profile was a feature added in CF10 in the installer. It's been there since CF10. If you chose the secure profile, then CF will get installed and configured out of the box with about 20 CF admin settings made to be more secure. That's what it does. And you can read that page to see the settings and see what the secure settings will be. And in CF11 and above, in the CF admin is a page called secure profile. And you can see on that page the 20 settings that the secure profile controls. And you can turn it on and turn it off. It doesn't have links to the individual settings in the admin, but they're there. All the settings are in the admin. So anyway, that's what the secure profile is. And for my needs, I'm going to say development profile. Now, one of the things people often notice, hey, I can't put in this. What's this about anyway? Well, again, it's up here and explains it. It's saying who's allowed to access the administrator. And the default in 2021, and I believe even 2018, 2016, is that by default, only the local host IP address is allowed to access it. So this just doesn't let you change that. But it says you can change it later. So in the administrator, there's a page where you can pick what IP addresses do you want to allow to access the admin. But in recent versions of CF, by default, it's configured to only be accessible via localhost. And in CF 2016 and above, you cannot get to the administrator through your external web server. You must use the ColdFusion's built-in web server, which by default will be 8500. And if you've already got something installed, it'll pick a different number. Again, we'll come to that in a bit. But the point is, for most people, they don't need to bother with this. And if they do, they can either do it here if they choose secure profile, or they can do it in the admin if they choose either production or development. There's no reason this should be blocked. You should be able to put that in either way, but let's move on. That's another issue for another day. Then you get presented with these choices of, do you want these other related ColdFusion services to be installed? And some people know what they are and some people don't. Well, if you mouse over them, there's a little pop-up at the bottom that says what they're about. So there's the Solar service, which is about CF Search, CF Index, CF Collection. The PDFG, which is about CF HTML PDF. That's new in CF 11 and above. It's an alternative to CF Document. You can still use CF Document, but you can also instead use CF HTML to PDF. And those two things run in what's called the Addon service. Whatever OS you're on, it's called the Addon service. They run together in there. This thing is kind of quirky. It's really for if you have like ColdFusion Builder and you want to start and stop ColdFusion from within Builder. If you want to, sure, enable it. I don't, so I turn it off. And if I had chosen the production profile or beyond, I wouldn't have seen that. And then this .NET, a lot of people don't know what this is about. This is if you interact with .NET from CFML. So if you say like CF object type equals .NET or create object parentheses .NET, if you do that, then you need this .NET integration feature. If you don't, then you don't need it. So turn it off if you don't need it. And I don't need it, so I'm going to turn it off. And I might use these, so I tend to leave those on. And that's the way I go, but you know, everybody's needs are different. Now, the ODBC service, this is very interesting. For some reason in CF 2021, you don't get a choice. You can't turn it on or turn it off. And what's really weird is they turn it on anyway. It will be implemented. I don't know why. It seems to be a mistake. But anyway, I don't have time to deal with talking about that. So just know that that will be enabled by default. Now, I've seen a lot of comments coming up, so let me just stop and try to look at what are all these questions. We're going to have a hard time getting through this talk with all the questions. You have to have an enterprise license to support WAR installs. So let's be clear, not quite. You need to have an enterprise license to be able to use it in production. You don't need an enterprise license to use it for trial or developer. So we want to say that you cannot use the WAR deployment with ColdFusion Standard. That's what you're saying. And that's a good point. You cannot use the WAR deployment with ColdFusion Standard, which, by the way, that's why you can't use the standard license with Command Box, because under the covers, what Command Box does is implement a WAR deployment of CF. So anyway, and then Carl says, you're right. And yep, you can follow Command Box path, right? Bigger questions, how to move beyond cab configurations. John, if you could explain. Yeah, there you go. And Francisco's even asking what you mean by car configurations. Yes, we will talk about that. We're running out of time, so I'm going to have to go through this quickly. But in the end, I'm going to point out that there is a new alternative to using car features. That's the ColdFusion archive for migrating settings from one version to another. I said at the beginning of the talk I wasn't going to have time to cover migration options, but I will later point out that there are alternatives, and I have a presentation I've given on that subject. So let's move on. Has anyone here done, has anyone here done a recent migration from 2018 to 21? Any major issues? I'm about to go through the process right now. So JJ, you must have missed when I said earlier, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Most people had no trouble. Yes, there are some issues. And yes, I see you mentioned the blog post about the date format. You did not have to refactor, but I understand that you chose to. There was an update 1 that came out last month. And with update 1, there's a JVM argument that you can add that lets CF's date format capital D go back to being ignored and treated like a lowercase d. That's the issue there. Don't have time to get into that. You can install command box with cfconfig and use it to export configuration. Well, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but yes, so can CF 2021. It has an alternative to cfconfig called CF setup. Again, we'll get to that in a little bit. Some settings are not exported. Okay, we're going to move on. We're looking to move to Dockerized CF. Yes, so again, I'll mention Docker later. We've done, I had no problem. Yep, good for you. I don't know about the compatibility with EHCache and had to clean up the EHCache folder. That's interesting. I'm not aware of that, but let's move on. All right, so I'm going to not do that. So that's that. So I just wanted to get those points out. This is a weird thing, and they talk about it a little bit, but not really doing it justice. This is if you want that add-on service, which is for the PDFG and the Solar. If you, for some reason, wanted to expose that service and those services to people coming in from outside your server, this is an option to do that. Now, you might say, well, I want my users to be able to create PDFs. Are you talking about that? No, we're not talking about that. If you do CF HTML to PDF, you don't need this feature enabled. ColdFusion is accessing the add-on service directly. They're on the same machine. But if you had to, for some reason, put it on another machine, you could conceivably put the add-on service on another machine. And there's an installer for that at the ColdFusion Downloads place. If you Google ColdFusion Downloads, there's a page where you could download just the PDFG, and it's called the add-on service installer. You could put it on another machine, and if you did, then you would need to configure it to be callable from your CF. But anyway, that's not what this is about. So for most people, just ignore this and move on. And I know I'm skipping over some things. You might wish I could talk about it at more length, but I can't. Oh, and I didn't mean to click that there. What did we skip? Yeah. So this next question was, where do you want to install it? I'll just let it put it on the C drive. You could change it to whatever drive or folder you want. And then it says, I'm going to make the CF built-in web server be on this port 8500. So again, I said earlier, if I already had CF running, some older version or other version of CF running, it would have picked a new port. And I know that's tiny. I don't know why this is happening. It's just not picking up the high DPI. But the point is, that says 8500, and it would say 8501 if I already had CF installed and running at 8500 for like CF 2018, it would pick 8501. Okay, so this is a new VM. I don't have it installed. That's why I picked 8500. And you might think, well, these aren't things people need to know. Come on, it's on the screen. No, trust me, they need to know. I do it with people every day. Some of this stuff is just not obvious. What's on the screen isn't as clear as it could be. That's the purpose of this talk, or at least half of the purpose of this talk. So then this is about the PMT, Performance Monitoring Toolset, and it just picks the name of the machine. And for now, for most people, that's fine. And it says you can change it later in the admin. We're not going to talk about the PMT in this talk. And then you pick a password. And since I picked the developer version, I can put in a simple password. But if you pick the production version, it would have to be a complex one as they show up there. I'm not going to enable RDS, and I'm not going to talk in this talk about what RDS is. You can read the box and read the website to learn more about it later. I've done talks in the past about it. And then finally, this is very important. I see so many people turn this off because they read this as, I don't want you updating my ColdFusion automatically. That's not what it says. It says, do you want me to check for updates? It doesn't say, do you want me to apply updates? So everybody should do this. Unless you know you're on a server that doesn't have internet access, you should do this. And when you go into the CF admin, every time you go into the CF admin, it'll say, oh, let me go see if there's any updates to CF for you. Oh, there's an update for CF. And I've seen a lot of people who did not know that CF was updated because whoever installed CF misinterpreted this, checked it off, and therefore they never got the prompt in the CF admin saying, hey, there's updates of CF. Come get them. So we're going to move on. So that's it. Then it says, this is what I'm going to do. You okay with it? I'm okay with it. I'm going to let it run. And I'm not right now going to focus on that. I want to move on. And first, let me see if there's any questions that have come up. I need to moderator to assist you. Well, and I could do a recorded version and then answer the questions as we go. I've thought about that, but thank you for the suggestion. All right, cool. All right, so while this is running, let's move on, do some other things, and we'll come back to that because that will take a little while. And again, it seems to be slower on this VM than it should be. So there are other topics that we could cover, and there's probably some that came up today that I didn't think to put on this list, but each of these is worthy of their own session. We could talk about configuring the web server and ColdFusion to talk to each other, whether you're using IIS or Apache. And then there's some people who want to use Nginx and other things, and that's not supported by CF, but it's possible to be configured. You can forward requests to the ColdFusion built-in web server port with any web server. But anyway, that's not the focus of today, so we're not going to get into that. And that's the web server. Also, web server configuration. Like, I'm not going to talk about how do you set up your websites to point to a web root. Where does you put your code? Should you put your code in the web root? Should you put your code in a ColdFusion web root? We don't have time to get into that. We're not going to talk about locking down CF, but just be aware there is a ColdFusion lockdown guide. It's been out for several releases, and there's one for 2021. Came out just in January, I believe. And there's also a ColdFusion lockdown tool, new since 2018. So it's in 2018, in 2021. And if you run it, it will do everything that's in the lockdown guide. And that may seem compelling to some people and think, sweet, man, why didn't we get that sooner? And others will go, run away, run away. Don't go doing that. You'll hate your life. So let me just explain quickly. Whenever you either do the lockdown steps yourself or you let the tool do everything that's in the lockdown guide, you are making your CF setup be secure. Yay, you. You've made CF secure. And that's a wise thing to do, right? Everybody wants to be more secure. Problem is, if I got a house and I put bars on my windows and guards at the front door, and I put a wall around my house with guards at the house and concertina wire, and you have to be on the list to be able to get in, I'm going to be safe and secure, but boy, I'm going to make life difficult for me and anybody that comes to visit me. And all I'm trying to say just as quickly is the lockdown guide is like doing everything to guard your castle. And the first time you try to run your app, you may find you can't get past page 1. So just be careful. Don't go doing it in production. If you've never tested it, you should do it in a test environment. And furthermore, don't go doing it in a test environment unless you back up your server first, because you may find that it does a bunch of stuff and you go, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. I can't even do stuff in the OS at the level that I'm used to. So again, I'm just saying, be very careful. The lockdown guide and tool, they're powerful, and with power comes responsibility. Okay. So let me see how this is doing. And you sometimes get this prompt, and I'm not going to discuss it right now, but it's because it's running a Java installer under the covers, and it's just say yes to that. It's not explained anywhere, but it held up that step. So I'm going to move on back to this. So let me just go ahead and start talking about the zip installer. So the zip installer, again, is new in 2021. It's a new modular design to really reduce the size of that install file. You might have noticed that that other full installer was like a gig, and it's a gig on Windows, a gig on Mac, a gig on Linux. It's a gig plus. The new zip install is much smaller. It's only 150 meg. And it just implements the core engine and gives you the option to add other packages. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And the size of the deployed CF beyond just the zip, once it's extracted, it's still also much smaller than a full install if you just have it with the core packages. As you start adding packages, you're going to get right back up to the same size as the full installer, because the full installer just implements all the packages. And you're wondering, what are packages? We'll get back to that in a bit. The point is the zip install option, it starts out as a very basic, limited functionality, and you choose to add more to it. So it uses less disk space, uses less memory, and it starts faster. All that's great. And you can read more about this thing called the package management at this URL. I'll talk more about it in a moment, but I just want to move on to some key points. That zip approach is offered also for Windows, Linux, Mac, and Solaris. And the way it works is you would unzip the zip that you got. And believe it or not, there's a zip inside of that. You would unzip that zip, and that would create a ColdFusion folder. That ColdFusion folder would be your ColdFusion. There's no installer. You now have, wherever you had unzipped it, you've now got a ColdFusion folder. Now, the thing is you might think, oh, cool, I'm set, I'm done, right? No, you're not done. You cannot run code with that until you do this next step. And you might go, well, crap, that kind of defeats the point, doesn't it? No, it doesn't defeat the point. This CF install, which is in the bin folder of that ColdFusion, it just does some basic things. It doesn't do everything that the full installer does, but it does some of the things that we just went through. So you needed to understand that. But again, the key point is you'd extract the zip, and before you can run anything, you will have to at least run this to accept the licensing agreement. That's just the way they did it. And it just makes a few prompts and actually enables a service if you'd like it to. And I'll say again, this can be scripted. This thing right here, this CF install with those prompts, there's a support for a silent install properties file. So yes, it can be entirely scripted. Now we've run out of time. I don't really feel like I have time to do a demo of that. You can just try it yourself. It's straightforward enough. You just go get the zip and extract it and run it. And I'd also wanted to do a demonstration of the Linux installer. I was prepared to do that right here. I had that ready to go. Let me just say a couple things. So you do need to run this as root, however you choose to do it, sudo, whatever you want to do. You have to run it as root. And if you don't, you get about, you know, 1 or 2 screens in and it says, hey, wait a minute, you need to be running as root. So I'm going ahead and run this, and you'll see it does basically the same thing. It extracts the zip, and then, or sorry, this is not the zip. This is the full installer up here. This is the Linux bin. This is the full installer. It says GUI, but there's no GUI. I'm at the command line. There's no GUI. It's the full installer. And I'm saying that it goes through the same process that the other one did. It was extracting out of that bin the installer, and now it's running the installer, and you go through these various questions. And if any of you have done this, some of these questions go on and on and on for a while. And for some reason, I wasn't seeing the bottom of the screen. And you got to go past all these. And you just keep hitting enter. I wish there was a way to skip over it. And even if you keep hitting enter, look, it doesn't kill anything. It just goes, wait, you got to accept the license agreement. So I'm going to say, yes, I accept the license. I don't know why this is not showing me the bottom of the screen, but I'm just going to scroll up a little bit and show you that from this point forward, it's pretty much the same kind of stuff. It's just presented at the command line. It's the same choices. Okay, so everything I showed you before applies to a command line install. And by the way, I'm doing this at Linux command line, but you can also install ColdFusion for Windows at the command line and tell it to do a console install. And again, both of these can be scripted. So you can script the zip install and its CF install bat. You can script the full install, and all these questions can be answered in a silent properties file. And I'm just going to show you that my CF is finally done, and there it is, ready to launch the administrator. And I'll just click done, and it'll open the administrator, and that we're done. And that's installed. But let's move on, try to wrap up in the remaining several minutes that we have. So a couple gotchas about this zip install, right? I switched gears to show you the finishing of the full installer on Windows, and I switched gears to show you the full install on Linux. Now we're talking again about the zip install, the thing that's new in 2021. That zip install does have some gotchas. It does not install that Visual C++ redistributable. If I had run that on a machine that did not have that Visual C++ redistributable, that zip install mechanism does not detect it, does not offer to install it. And you might go, well, what do I lose for that? Well, again, there's some features in CF that leverage that, and those features wouldn't work. And they're documented in various places in the docs. I don't have time to get into that right now. Another thing is that that zip install approach does not cause the first launch of the admin to trigger the migration wizard. If we go back to that CF install, if you look right here with the full install, the first time you launch the administrator, it pops up and says, oh, I can look and see if you've got another CF instance on this machine. And if so, I can migrate those settings. And I'll just go ahead and log in, and you'll see that it says, I'm looking for it. Do you want me to do that? And it's going to find that it didn't find any, and therefore it's just going to move on. But if you did have a prior version of CF, it would say, oh, do you want me to import those settings? And if you said yes, it would import them. All I'm saying about this is that the zip install does not do that. And this is covered in the docs about the zip install. I've got links to the docs about all these installers, and this is the particular section of that guide talking about how the migration wizard doesn't run and what you can do about that. So if you need to run the migration wizard, you can make it happen. I don't have time to get into that. The zip install also does not even offer to do that .NET or the Solar and the PDFG. Again, you can download and install them yourself if you want to. And it doesn't implement the sample databases, which are based on Derby. Some people never even know they're there, but they're there in many installs of CF, but they're not there in the zip. So let's wrap up with some related topics I just want you to be aware of. So the packaging feature. So this is new in CF 2021. You can choose to implement packages or not. In fact, let me go back to this admin. And for those who have never seen the CF admin before, this is the first time since CF 2018 when you first come in, it looks like this, and it can be a bit disconcerting. If you just click a button, it looks a little bit more friendly. This is what used to be in the sections on the left under settings, and here's data sources. They're under the section called Data and Services, and there's some new ones here for CF 2021. We don't have time to get into that. We're not talking about what's new in 2021. But down here at the bottom is a new package manager. That's new in 2021. And the core server is, you know, the basic engine. And then these packages, there's like 25 of them. And I'll just want, sorry, I didn't mean to click that. Just wanted to scroll down. But if you look at this, The full installer went ahead and installed all 25 packages. And some of them you might go, I don't use DynamoDB, I don't use Lambda, I don't use Azure. Well, what about the debugger? What about the administrator? What about caching features? What about whatever, CF document, event gateways? There's so many different packages. The point is, now you can choose to, if you want to, with that zip, you could choose to say, I don't want anything but 1 or 2 modules, and that it'll be nice and lean. Or I want you to know that you can do all this even without a zip installer. So first, with your full installer from the command line, you could go to your CFusion bin folder, and there's a CFPM, BAT, or SH. And you would run that CFPM, and at the command line, be led through a process of being able to manage the packages. And sorry, that's a leftover slide from a previous version of this where I mentioned it in my Hidden Gems talk. Anyway, you can run that thing interactively or just with commands. And again, I've got links to the docs about that. And you can have it scan your code to identify what packages you need. Again, this talk is not about the package management. I knew I wouldn't have time to get into it in depth. I just want you to know that, yes, an aspect of the zip option is that it starts out with no packages. The full installer presumes to install all the packages, and you can make something in the middle as you desire. And there's even a feature of the CFPM to help you know what packages would you need. And for those of you that are in offline environments, you've probably heard some people say, well, that's not going to work for me because I'm not connected to the internet. No. You can use a download repo command within the CFPM, and you could download all of the packages and then put them on your server. And then you could run the CFPM against that downloaded repo. And then separately, I just mentioned that in the CF Administrator, there's this package manager section, and you can see about that. I'll leave you to look at it. And then finally, if you do use the Docker image, which we'll just mention briefly in a moment, the Docker image has support to import modules to be used. And install modules would be a list of packages, and import modules would be the name of a file listing the packages to import. Those are both environment variables if you use the Docker image. And here's the docs about that. So everything I just mentioned is covered in that doc. So again, don't worry that you didn't catch it all. Get the presentation recording, the PDF, on my website, down at the bottom right corner, carehart.org. Go to the presentations area, get this presentation, follow that link, read more about this on your own. I want to wrap up. So we mentioned briefly in passing, there is this new JSON-based administrator configuration, and it's called CF Setup. Command Box calls theirs CF Config. This is called CF Setup, and it's in the config folder of your CF, and it's just called CF Setup.bat or CF Setup.sh. And again, sorry, I left that in from my Hidden Gems talk. It's very similar to Command Box's CF Config. It's nowhere near as powerful. It can't be used across multiple engines or versions, so I'm not saying it replaces your need to leverage Command Box's CF Config. Command Box's CF Config, even if you don't want to use Command Box for your running of ColdFusion, you should look at the Command Box CF Config. It is a powerful tool, and you don't have to, quote, use Command Box as in run your ColdFusion as Command Box. You can just use the CF Config tool in Command Box, and I'm just saying it does more than CF's built-in CF Setup. But again, some people are either unable to, uninterested in, or won't use anything else but what Adobe provides. And so now Adobe provides in CF 2021 this CF Setup script. Okay. And also the Docker images has an import CF settings environment variable to pull in a file that names that would have the JSON built by this CF Setup tool. So that's cool. And again, you can read more about this on your own. I knew I wouldn't have time to get into it. And then the activation feature, we've talked about that briefly. You can do it over manual activation if you don't have internet access. And there is a page in the admin on dealing with it and a tab to watch your usage of Docker images based on that license. It only works if you have a production license to show the Docker image usage. And it doesn't apply, this is the key point, the activation does not apply to free use of the development or trial edition. So no, you don't need to activate ColdFusion to use it. You need to activate ColdFusion to use a licensed standard or enterprise. Okay. And again, there's a page discussing it in more detail. Some other related topics, I mentioned this already, web server configuration. I could talk about running CF on a machine that has an old version. I knew I wouldn't have time. I mentioned the lockdown guide, lockdown tool. Yeah, I mentioned these already. I have to just update that. And then finally, install alternatives. I've said over and over, you can do silent installation. Both the full installer and the zip install can be completely scripted. Apologies for that typo. There's a link to more on that. So again, there's resources out there. You might go, well, Charlie, couldn't I just read the manual and not attend your talk? Well, yeah, but I'd work with people every day who never know that this stuff is documented. So the talk is to guide you to see that there's these things to know, and B, there is ample documentation of them. Many people think the only thing that's out there is the CFML reference, and you're never going to learn any of this stuff from the CFML reference. So yes, there's resources on all these things, silently installing. And then there's Docker images from Adobe and from Ortus. Ortus has their own Docker images for ColdFusion, for Lucy. Adobe has images, again, for CF 2021, 2018, 2016. And I did a blog post back in 2019 on getting started with them. So check that out if you're interested. You can do J2E deployment. Remember, we're talking about alternatives to installing. So you can do silent install, you can do Docker-based deployment, and you can do J2E or JEE deployment. And again, that's EAR and WAR files, and there's docs on that. So all this stuff is covered. And then finally, yes, there is command box, which would be another way to not do any of this if you choose. There's some benefits that some people would say are great. Others would go, those aren't benefits I need, so I need to do these other things. So it's an option. It's not the option that everybody should be using. It's an option that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. I just want to leave it at that. Additional resources about CF 2021. I've done a blog post when it came out, pointing out all the things that were new. Adobe did curiously, a forum thread where they posted it. It wasn't a blog post, but it also covered everything that was new. And then there's a guide in the documentation called What's New in CF 2021. And as far as the zip installer, there's multiple resources on that. Actually, I meant to say this was about installers. This thing only talks about the zip installer, which is curious. It doesn't talk about the full installer. It talks about zip and silent and J2E. And then there is this guide, which is installing the server configuration. I showed you that earlier. That has the screenshots of everything. And then they did a blog post, which again, they call it the ColdFusion 2021 install experience. It's really just about the zip installer. So again, if you like the zip and you want to learn about that, check out the first and last bullets in this section called about the zip installer. Whew. All right. Finally, I told you that there's some other things I've done which could give you some further insight into the things we had to skip. So go to carehart.org presentations for my hidden gems in 2021, my keeping CF and Java updated, challenges and solutions to that, my differences between ColdFusion Enterprise and Standard. These are all talks I've given in the past year or two, getting started with the ColdFusion Docker images. And for those of you that are skipping from an old version, back in the 2018 timeframe, I did this talk in the 2016 timeframe of what was new in 10, 11, and 2016 that you may have missed. So if you're skipping from one of these old versions, at least check out that talk. You'll see I talked about what was new with them. I need to revisit that and do it for what was new in 2016, 2018 that you might have missed if you're skipping from 11. But anyway, moving on. Whew, in summary, I hope you may be more informed now about installing CF 2021, whether you're using the full installer or the zip install and the related features. Again, CFPM for the package management, CF setup for the creation of a JSON file with the configuration settings from your admin. I know I went by that very quickly. That's what that's about, creating a JSON file of your admin settings. When John Farrar asked earlier about alternative to the CAR mechanism, this is the new alternative to the CAR mechanism. Use that CF setup or look at CF config from command box. And then I talked about the activation feature. And again, if you have any questions and follow up, here's my contact information. And I'll leave that on there while I turn my attention to your questions that have come up since then. All right. CFML Slack is a good update. I'm going to go ahead and click the button now and highlight these. Roman says CFML Slack is a good update notificator for CF versions. So sure, if you follow the CFML Slack, when a new version comes out, people would talk about it. That's his point. And you would learn about it that way. John says the installer versus containerizer, very different installations. We'll be doing a session. So again, you just saw I did do previously a session on using ColdFusion Docker images. So if you want, you can see that talk. It hasn't really changed. I should do a revision of it that leverages the new features in 2021. And that's an interesting question. Should it be one that just says on what's new in 2021 with Docker, or should it be about you don't know what Docker is and how do you use it with ColdFusion? That's a challenge to figure out what the best way to talk about these topics are. Can we install the Linux installer in Windows WSL. Guess what, John? That's exactly what this is. This was WSL. So just quickly, for those who don't know, WSL is the Windows subsystem for Linux, and it's a feature that's been out for a couple years, and it is now also in Home as well as Pro, and it's basically a Linux VM just built into Windows. You just install it, configure it, and bam, when you start it up, you're running a Linux VM, and you can choose what it should be. Mine is Ubuntu. You can use whatever you want. Anyway, I am running that CF Linux install in my WSL because it's just a Linux VM. It doesn't matter, but it's a good question. So I didn't want to take the time to explain it then, but you asked, so I answered. Sorry. Oh, okay. Getting a 404 on most of the links. Sam or anybody else, if you get a 404 on any link in any presentation of mine or on any page in any website of mine, please email me. I will fix it. I won't put it in a pile of things to do when I have time someday down the road. I will make it a priority. I don't ever want anything to be wrong. So you just send me an email and I'll get that corrected. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Nicholas. I'm just going down the list of questions. It's a kind of a goofy interface. Okay. In a couple of minutes, command box servers could be demonstrated, including the installation of command box, which is the only manual work you have to do. So Daniel is a fan of command box. He's probably asserting that I should have shown command box. I'm going to argue that, again, this is not a talk about command box, and not everybody can use command box or wants to. So if you'd like to give a talk on doing command box, I would welcome it. And I'm not saying that as a snark. I'm saying I know command box people are fans of it and think everybody should be using it. And if you want to give a talk on it, Brad has given some in the past. I would not be averse to anybody giving another talk on it. I'm not against it. I'm just saying this is not the talk to talk about it. I'm talking about installing CF with Adobe's installer. That's what this talk is about. And Daniel says, I don't use command box servers in production, but he does for development. So again, yes, that's the point. Again, not everybody is a developer. Many people need to install CF in production. And while some of them could even use command box in production, some of them cannot, either because command box doesn't allow it, like with standard, or because it doesn't make sense for their deployment. So again, let's move on. Thank you, Carl. Francisco at Tessie Square, we've created scripts to get the command box installed and create several servers in a breeze. Yes, again, yay, command box. And I know that sounds snarky. I know command box people are adamant fans of it, and go for it. Knock yourself out. Have fun. If you want to give a talk on it, I'd welcome it. And so good for you for representing that command box is great for you. We installed Enterprise with, and by the way, let me just say, if somebody thinks, well, Charlie, you're the only one that's kind of griping about it. No, this is like a lot of things in our culture today. There's not going to be any benefit of anybody speaking up and saying what I'm saying, because they're going to get, shouted down and held as being anti-command box. Just like if there were people suddenly talking about Lucy, and there are often people talking about Lucy, you can't stand up in the Lucy environment and say why it doesn't work for you, because you're just going to get shouted down by people that love Lucy. So there's the Lucy world, and there's the command box world, and then there's the some people need to be in the I do things the way Adobe provides for them world, and that's what this talk is for. So again, it's not that anybody's wrong. There's just different strokes for different folks. We installed Enterprise with past versions to have separate instances. Is CF 2021 Enterprise still the choice for multiple instances? Yes, it is. So CF Enterprise, whatever version, since 6, has had the ability for you to create multiple instances, and 2021 still has that. And that would be the only way to run multiple instances on a single machine, at least using the full installer. If you use the zip installer, you could conceivably install multiple ones. And that's an interesting point that I don't know if there's a licensing issue against that currently, but just, you name the folder and you could have 2 different folders. So I just want to answer that honestly. Thank you very much, Larry. Where can I get some real world UK circuit box? I browsed the website, can't tell how it would help. Let me just say this about that. So again, A, we've had past presentations here on it. B, the Ortus site has CF casts, and in CF casts, they've done multiple videos on using command box. But I agree with you that somebody that looks objectively at the stuff about command box can often come away going, I don't get it. And I know some people are thinking, then you're a moron. I know that's what you think, but it's not true. Look at it sometime objectively when you don't know anything, and you're going to find that you struggle. And frankly, I see this on the Lucy discussion list where people find they try to install Lucy and they have trouble and they bring it up and people treat them like they're morons. And now I'm talking about installing CF and people have trouble with it. And some people want to treat them like morons. Like, this is just our nature of an IT. People who know what they know think that what they know, everybody knows. And my job is to help people solve problems. And I do it every day. And I'm telling you that the things I've covered today, people often don't know. So if you know it, good for you. And if you're a huge command box fan and you think everybody should get it and never have any trouble with it, good for you. But people do have trouble with these things and they do need help. So I agree with you, Tim. I think there's some things they could do to tweak that. And you might want to mention that to them. Or again, if somebody wants to give a talk on it, there's Tim representing an audience who would say, look, tell me more. I'd love to hear more. And then here's Daniel saying, I have a hard time convincing my teams to use command box. So what are the reasons behind people that say I will only use what? Wait, I have a hard time convincing my team to use commit. I may have a hard time convincing my team to use command box servers. So what are the reasons behind people that say I will only use what Adobe provides? Well, we're getting a little long on this discussion. But again, the point is, first of all, if you want to run ColdFusion Standard, you cannot use command box. Second, if all you want to do is set up one CF instance, you may not want the overhead and the learning how command box works to do that. But for sure, if you want to run multiple things, especially run Lucy and ColdFusion and different versions of ColdFusion and all that stuff, command box can be very powerful. But not everybody needs all that. They just need one running CF instance, and they want to do it the way Adobe says to do it. It could be as simple as that. It's a much more, potentially evolved conversation, but let's not get too far down the rabbit hole on that. And I'm not anti-command box. I'm just saying it's not the answer to everybody's problems that some people think it is. Every time some subjects come up, the answer is, why are you even talking about that? If I do a post on how the JVM got updated last week, and here's how you deal with updating the JVM, which I just did this week, there's a post on that. Some people would say, well, you don't need to worry about that. If you use command box, it'll just take care of it for you. Okay, we got it. But if you're not using command box, you need help in understanding how to deal with updating the JVM that underlies ColdFusion. Again, I know I'm sounding a bit whiny and defensive. It's just that not everybody's using command box. I think there's a blog post coming. It's already forming in my head. For the PDF of this presentation, at least 3 so far. Oh, yeah, right. Well, right. So if you see anything, please share it with me. I would love to fix it, and I will immediately put the new PDF up on the website before I eat lunch after this call. So after this session, so if you send it to me, I will get that corrected immediately. And it could just be some goofy thing like, the way the PDF got rendered, a space got put in at the end of the line. You may have noticed if you guys are looking at the PDF or if you paid attention to my screen, I always try to shrink down the URLs so they fit on one line to prevent such problems. And then one other thing is I always take off the HTTPS or HTTP part and even the www part, because usually that's not needed. So it's possible, Sam, that you just need to add a www into something, but usually they don't fail. So again, just let me know. I would fix it if there's a problem. And if it's something that Adobe could fix, I'll let them know. So thank you for that. Thanks, everybody, for your kind comments. I won't show those. I'll just move on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. I tend to talk about command box. Okay. I'd love, again, somebody to step up and say, I will give a talk on command box, because there's clearly an audience that wants to hear it. And it's not that I couldn't do it. I got other things to focus on. And in the day-to-day work I do, by far, most people don't use command box for the stuff I'm helping them with. They're not developers, they're administrators managing CF servers, and they don't use it. And I'm not going to try to explain to them why they should switch to it, because in their particular situation, they may not need it or they may not be able to use it. So again, there is an audience that would love to hear about it. There's also an audience who would not be interested. Just please understand that, people. And yes, command box can do either Lucy or ColdFusion. Yes. Moving on. Yep. Okay. Definitely CF is still alive. It's very alive, believe it or not. People who think it's not, that's just sad old news being touted all the time. Adobe came out with CF 2021 in November of last year, and they're already working on the next release. I'm just starting to annotate my code. It doesn't mean my old code is bad, but I do wish I had started years ago. Command box is a similar thing. Again, John, I'm not knocking it. If it makes sense for some people to use, they can use it. But again, not everybody's going to use it, just like not everybody wants to use somebody's favorite editor, or not everybody wants to use somebody's favorite CFML engine. Different strokes for different folks. And I know your point is, yeah, but if you knew better, you'd choose better. Okay, it's possible. Again, let everybody find out through their own digging. And I've said, and I'll say it again, if somebody wants to give another talk on Command Box, come on. I didn't think to find a link to the one that Brad had done in the past. And also, Brad sometimes is too close to it, and the way he presents it, it may not be the same way that somebody else would present it. So I'm stressing that I'd certainly be happy to have Brad back. I'm saying I would welcome somebody else, especially who's not so close to it, to give a talk from their perspective of how it's beneficial for them. And then you can take all these questions and comments and deal with them. And I'll help you out because I'll be here while you're doing it. There you go. Cool. Spoke to the CF team a few weeks ago. CF had a great run. Yeah, exactly. They're working on versions already coming up. And yeah, I knew you, but they may should call it Commando. But that's the people that are fans of it can be called Commandos. There you go, Brad. You won't probably be listening to this because he doesn't install CF this way. He would be using Command Box, but somebody can let him know that they should call Command Box fans Commandos. I think that's an excellent idea. All right, so I think I've gotten through all the comments there. And we're 15 minutes in. That's normal. Most of our talks do go for about 15 minutes. And so, anybody else have any comments? It is alive, but it has to work from home also. It is alive. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. He was answering Jerry. I don't see what comment Jerry made that you're responding to. But while we wait for that to sort out, ColdFusion is still alive. He's making a joke. I get it. It has to work from home. Yes. ColdFusion, like everybody else, is having to work from home. Not everybody is. I was working with somebody just yesterday. They were in an office. So people are going back to work. So any other remaining outstanding questions? Yes, someone other than Ordis. Yeah. And again, that's not to say that someone from Ordis can't do it. Of course they can. But I think it would be helpful to see it from someone from the outside, because you will present it from a different perspective. And I'm just going to stress again, if you are someone hearing this and you saw this presentation, look at all the comments, hear the things that I mentioned, to be aware that there's a perspective of presenting it that you need to give consideration to. Don't presume that you got a big, hammer in your hand and you're just saying, hey, everybody, why aren't you using Command Box? Use Command Box. You should understand the pros and cons and lay those out, because there are sometimes some reasons that it doesn't make sense. But again, please don't. I fear that someone's already left and they're just going to go saying Charlie's against Command Box. That's not my point. I'm just saying it's not the solution to every problem. What improvements should be made to the CF installer? Well, there's a bunch. I mean, I saw some things along the way there that I thought, why'd they do that? I would argue that's not something we can discuss easily and quickly here. And some of them, you won't think of them until you go through it and you trip over them. And I can tell you, I do it with people every day. And there's things where I go, I can't believe that's still there. So Daniel, why did you ask that question? Are you in a position to get some feedback to somebody who's responsible for the installer? Is that why you're asking? And I'll say, by the way, while we're waiting for him to type that, everybody is free to write feedback to Adobe, like a feature request or a bug report about the installer. I did a blog post a couple years ago on how you can use tracker.adobe.com. That's the bug reporting mechanism. You can use that for far more than just ColdFusion bugs. You can use it for doc bugs. You can use it for Docker, ColdFusion Docker bugs. You can use it for installer bugs and feature requests. So for sure, anybody that would like to share any feedback they have about an issue that they tripped over with the installer, you can file it in the tracker.adobe.com. And then John throws in, he'd be willing to also do a talk on live share. So if you're saying you'd like to do that on the CF meetup and have the meetup send its stuff out via a live share, we could talk about that, sure. Or you can just do it on your own if that's what you're saying. We use it. Okay, he's talking about CF, I guess. We use it year in, year out, and I'm wondering what improvements you think are needed and if the Adobe team is aware and have promised to make those improvements. I cannot say, so yes, there are improvements needed. No, I cannot say if they're aware of them. That's why the tracker is the place to bring it to their attention. And even when you bring it to their attention, they do not promise to make those improvements. So no, you'll never get a promise from anybody. Even most vendors won't promise. I promise that if you tell me about a broken link, I will fix it. You know, I promise that if you hire me to help solve a problem and you feel I wasted your time, you won't pay for that time. You don't get too many promises in the IT world, but so you won't get promises, I think, about that. But yeah, so let me type it in, tracker.adobe.com. I've just typed it into the chat pod. Let me go ahead and open it up in a browser real quick. Tracker.adobe.com. So this is a site that has existed for many years, and its interface really hasn't changed in recent years. And we could have a talk on that. I mean, you couldn't talk for a half an hour on it even. But anyway, so in it, you can add bugs, add feature requests, track which ones you've presented, and it tells you where they are and what their status is and why they were so, and the brief and when they were created and all that stuff. It's all sortable. Cool. You can search for things. It's a really clunky old interface. If you're looking for ColdFusion bugs and trying to say, did somebody else already report it? Basically, what I would say is go here and pick ColdFusion and then leave everything else as it is and come down to either the title or description and type in what you're looking for. So let's say we were saying, did anybody file a bug report or a feature on the Redis feature of ColdFusion, the Redis integration feature? And look, there you go. Yes, there were, and some are noticed to fixed, some are closed. And if you go to the one, they tell you when it got closed and what version it got closed in and what update of ColdFusion fixed it. So update 11 of CF 2018 fixed a problem with, you know, blah, blah, blah. All right. So that's that. There you go. Yes. Cool. There's so many things to bookmark. In fact, let me just say this as a closing point. If you go to cf411.com, cf411.com, that domain name right there, that redirects to my website to a section called CF411. And on it, I have 2,000 tools and resources of interest to CFers. And at the top, I have the group of resources. And there I talk about like help mechanisms. So the Slack channel, the Adobe CF support forum, the portal, and many other things. And then I have, like 1,200 tools in about 150 categories of tools that are related to ColdFusion. So yeah, don't believe that you're alone and there's no information out there. Nobody knows about ColdFusion. That's just not true. So again, go to cf411.com. All right. Any other questions or comments? It looks like we've reached the end of them. Nobody else is adding any new ones. So that's it. At 20 minutes after, let's go ahead and call it a day. Let people get on with their days. Thanks everybody who came on. Apologies to anybody that feel like I was oversensitive to the pressing of the points about command box, but it's just that some people swear it's the only answer that anybody needs to know. And I'm just telling you, there are reasons that it's not the only answer they need to know. Some people need to know these other things. So please don't beat up those of us who are trying to help people who have their reasons for doing what they're doing. Everybody's got their place. And as you saw, I did mention at the end that command box is an alternative to installing ColdFusion. So I get it. I get it, but it's just not the answer for everybody. So again, thanks everybody who's saying thank you. And we'll see what talks come up in the near future. I've already got some in mind myself. I may even do one next week. I don't think I'll do the one that everybody's talking about here, but I might do one of the ones that I said we didn't have time to cover. So I may come back and do something like that. So thanks again for everybody coming on to watch, and for those watching the recording. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow the playlist. And we'll look forward to seeing you whenever the next session comes out. Until then.